Did the Las Vegas Raiders general manager John Spytek release some of the strategy that they're kind of going into this draft with? Are the Raiders actually interested in a quarterback and a running back with the sixth overall pick? It's a very interesting question. A lot of people have been talking about this on social media. So if you guys did not know this, John Spytek and Pete Carroll both did a presser together. Just a couple days back, they answered questions from the media. The Raiders have obviously started their offseason workouts, right? At least the first phase of the voluntary portion of the Raiders offseason. And with that, John Spytek and Pete Carroll took some questions from journalists, right? And one of the interesting things that the Las Vegas Raiders general manager was asked was specifically about the quarterback position. Will the Raiders look to add a quarterback potentially? And he put it out there, right? He pretty much made it clear that the Raiders will be looking to draft a quarterback. In fact, I'm going to quote exactly what this guy had to say. He went out there and said that the Raiders will remain open-minded about potentially drafting a quarterback. Anybody that can help us at that position in particular is going to be up for consideration. You guys all have done your investigative journalism well enough to know that we brought some quarterbacks in. That wasn't by accident by any means. And we remain open to the most important position in sports to get it right. And we're super excited to have Gino here. And we continue to expect for him to be here for a while. But you can't have too many of those guys. To me, what John Spytek is saying is interesting, right? He's basically saying that the Raiders, although they have Geno Smith, will look to add another quarterback. And we know that this is something Pete Carroll has done in the past, right? He had Matt Flynn as his quarterback when he first got over there to the Seahawks. They gave him a ton of money, right? Over $30 million guaranteed, and especially back then, that was a lot of money. And they still drafted Russell Wilson in the third round, and Wilson ended up winning the job. And he ended up being the quarterback for the Seahawks as they kind of went forward. But we know Pete Carroll's done this in the past, so is John Spytek looking to potentially do something like that for the Raiders again? Now, another interesting thing that John Spytek said, he was asked a little bit about the running back position specifically, and he's a believer in taking a running back high. That's what John Spytek told us. I'm going to quote exactly what he said. He says, we just saw Saquon Barkley change the Eagles in 1 year during Friday night's pre-draft news conference. He said there's certain ways to build a team. And I don't know where we got to a place where we don't feel like running backs are valued. He says, I come from the University of Michigan, and those guys are certainly really valued there. So it's hard for me to get away from that. You know, it's interesting because what John Spytek is saying, I would generally say that, you could take a guy with what he's saying, but when it comes to the NFL draft, I would say generally speaking, these guys are not actually putting their strategies out there. Oftentimes, they're getting other teams to try to buy into what they're saying. And I'll be the first to say, guys, right? It sounds interesting for Spytek to say, hey, we might take a quarterback, we might take a running back, especially high. But I think John Spytek is mostly saying this to try to get another team to potentially trade up. And not necessarily with the Raiders, but to trade up in front of the Raiders in the hopes that a better player ends up falling to the Las Vegas Raiders. Think about this. John Spytek in this same presser, and I know some of you guys watched this, but there was a moment when he was asked about Colton Miller. Will the Raiders trade Colton Miller, or the Raiders get a contract extension done with Colton Miller? Have they potentially started that conversation? Like, what's kind of going on with that? John Spytek quickly jumped in and said, hey, I'm going to say this one time and one time only. We're not talking about contract negotiations with active players. It's voluntary. He doesn't have to be here, essentially. But he quickly shut that question down, as opposed to when he was asked about quarterbacks and running backs. He said we're going to look to add these guys, right? So I almost feel like what John Spytek is saying is that what we're actually going to do, I'm not going to state it, but what we want other teams to do, or at least try to bait teams into doing. I'm going to go ahead and kind of put these statements out. If you think about it, the Colton Miller answer, the quarterback answer, the running back answered, it all just kind of makes sense, right? I think the Raiders are interested in keeping Colton Miller. I'd be very, very shocked if they don't end up bringing him back. He's 29 years old. He has probably 3 to 4 really good years left, I think, with offensive tackles that are quick with their footwork, quick in the movement, which Colton Miller obviously is. They'll have success going, in their early 30s to mid 30s, right? They can still continue to have success. Lane Johnson's a great example of this. He's like 34, 35. He's still out there dominating, right? With Colton Miller, I feel like the Raiders do want to keep him, which makes sense why Spytek answered the question he did with Miller. And then on the other end, if you think about the quarterback and running back position, there's a couple of teams that are very, very in need of both of those positions, or they're at least highly interested in those positions, right? So when you think about the quarterback, right, that's the one position that really, really, really matters. And there's two teams that I think would be interested in potentially trading up. The New York Jets have the 7th overall pick. And, let's just say Tennessee Titans take Cam Ward. The second and third pick start to kind of roll in. If you get a DN gone, a wide receiver gone, a corner gone, a tackle gone, and the Raiders are about to pick, right? Maybe it's like pick 5, and the Raiders pick at pick 6, and you're a team like the Saints or a team like the Jets, and you say, hey, we need to jump the Raiders to get Shedeur Sanders, right? Shedeur Sanders is widely considered the quarterback 2 in this class. We have to jump the Raiders. That's a team that's going to say, let's go ahead and make this happen. Let's reach out to the Patriots or to the Jaguars, and let's make this trade happen. And for the Raiders, it's beneficial because the Patriots might take the best tackle in this class. The Jaguars might take the best wide receiver available or the best defensive lineman available in this class. So for the Raiders, if those two teams trade out and teams take quarterbacks in front of us, that actually benefits the Raiders. Another thing we have to know is for the Raiders to say, hey, we want Ashen Genty. We'd love, we love this guy, great tape and all that. For John Spytek to go to the Boise State Pro Day and be the only general manager at the Boise State Pro Day, to me, he's trying to bait a team like the Bears or a team like the Cowboys. And we've widely heard, right? Even Adam Schefter put it out there that the Chicago Bears head coach Ben Johnson specifically is absolutely in love with Ashen Genty, and the Bears want to bring in Ashen Genty. And Ben Johnson's already made an investment in a high running back in the past, right? The Detroit Lions took Jamari Gibbs, I believe like with the 12th or 13th overall pick, wherever he ended up getting picked. A high first round pick. No one had that guy in the first round, right? Let's just be honest. Most people felt he was not a first round pick, and Ben Johnson still took him. And Ben Johnson obviously found a lot of success, but Ben Johnson needs a running back like Gibbs or Ashen Genty, right? An absolute explosive running back. And it's not like the Bears need offensive line help, right? The Bears have a very, very solid offensive line. They have their quarterback of the future. They have like 2 or 3 really good wide receivers, but they do need a running back. So John Spytek may look to leverage that and have the Bears potentially jump in front of us for us to get the better player, right? The better player essentially falls down to the Raiders. Now, here's another thing to kind of know. Yes, another team could theoretically take Ashen Genty, but Ashen Genty himself does not even feel like there's another team willing to draft him. In fact, Ashen Genty gave an honest assessment about where he thinks he'll land in the NFL draft. He was on Pro Football Talks, Mike Florio's show, and Ashen Genty said that I think the earliest that I will go is number 6. That's my belief, right? So he was asked specifically where he thinks he'll end up going in the NFL draft, and he says the earliest I'll go is number 6. He's also went on to say that would be the Raiders at that pick or somebody else trading up to get in front of them possibly. I think that's what's going to end up happening. So Ashen Genty is literally stating what he thinks is going to end up happening, right? He thinks there's a team that, when the Raiders pick comes around, he thinks will be drafted by the Raiders, not the first 5 teams, or there'll be a team willing to trade up. And I think that his agent most likely filled him in on, what's going to most likely happen. Us fans, we can guess, we can predict, like this guy might be traded, or this guy's interested in being drafted here, or this team's, really, really wants this defensive tackle. A couple years back, the Eagles were all in on Jalen Carter. Hey, we really, really want Jalen Carter. They made that trade up to put themselves in position to get Jalen Carter. And when that time came, the Bears also knew that same information. And the Bears wanted Darnell Wright, so they forced the Eagles to trade up with them, right? Or they said, we'll take Jalen Carter. So they had that information, and sometimes things like that leak from agents. Sometimes those things leak from, the actual teams, and, other teams kind of start to leak information of, hey, this team's reaching out to us for a trade because they're interested in player X, Y, or Z. To me, Ashen Genty putting it out there that the Raiders will be the first team to draft them also just kind of goes hand to hand with what John Spytek is saying. I don't think Spytek wants Ashen Genty. I'll be honest with you guys. I don't think he wants a quarterback, especially not at pick 6, and I don't think he wants Ashen Genty either. In fact, for him to specifically say that, when did it become a thing not to take a running back high? Spytek's never drafted a running back high, right? He found value in the running back last year in the 4th round. In fact, when they drafted, I believe it was Rachaad White, I think he was a 3rd round pick as well. He was not as good. He may have actually even been a 2nd round pick. He was not nearly as good as the guy they took in the 4th round just a year later, right? So I think even Spytek being in the building, drafting, having that experience, they found success with the running back later on in the draft. To me, I just don't see the Raiders actually taking either of those 2 positions. So did John Spytek leak what he's going to do? Absolutely not. I think he's trying to bait these teams into potentially trading up. And I just want to kind of give you guys my assessment on how I look at this, right? So first and foremost, the Tennessee Titans are going to take Cam Ward, right away. That's exactly what's going to end up happening. And then there's reports that the Browns and Giants are fielding trade calls for picks number 2 and 3. As I just stated, right, it is a fact that NFL agents talk to one another. NFL agents talk to Adam Schefter. They talk to Peter Schrags. They talk to all these other guys, or Peter Schrager. They talk to all these insiders, right? Insiders get their information directly from agents. There's a good chance that an agent, or if it's not an agent, it'll be an NFL team specifically telling one of these guys that, hey, we've heard, team XY is trying to trade out. Right? This team reached out to us, or this team reached out to us. And they might not ever tell these guys like, hey, we want Cam Ward, but they'll have no issue saying the Browns reached out to us via trade. So let's think about this here for a second. The Titans take Cam Ward, right? You got the number 2 overall pick. Apparently the Browns are looking to trade it. Let's just say the trade does not end up happening. And let's say the Browns want to pair up Myles Garrett with Abdul Carter, which I think could make a lot of sense for the Browns, right? You get 2 elite pass rushers. That could make a lot of sense, and that would make it very, very hard for any offensive line to block. So you get the Browns to essentially take Abdul Carter, and then you look at a team like the Giants. Well, the Giants are looking to trade out, and let's say they actually do trade out. Let's say the Saints and Giants make a trade, and the Saints jump up to 3, and they take Shedeur Sanders. Well, now you got a guy in Armin Membaugh and Travis Hunter that might fall a little bit, right? There's reports right now that the 3 best players in this class is Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, and Armin Membaugh. Those are the 3 best players coming out of this class. So with that, the Giants trade back, the Saints jump up and take quarterback. Now you got the Patriots, the Jaguars, and the Las Vegas Raiders, and you have 2 really, really, really good players left on the board. That doesn't include Ashen Genty, who I think is going to be a superstar as well. That means the Raiders could legitly get one of those guys, right? Can legit get one of those superstar caliber players. And even if Travis Hunter goes too, right, Abdul Carter would theoretically be available as well in that other pool of players. And that doesn't include the fact that the Dallas Cowboys, the Chicago Bears, could also be looking to trade up in front of the Raiders if they actually think the Raiders want a running back. Right? So this could just work out really well for the Raiders if we can get 2 teams to jump in front of us. We might end up getting Abdul Carter. We might end up getting Travis Hunter. Now, I know, those 2 guys is probably like 5% that we're going to get those 2 guys. But the fact that there's reports that other teams are wanting to trade back, and then there's teams that need quarterbacks, there's teams that really, really want running backs. And keep in mind, you go from, let's say, for example, like a pick 10 where the Bears are, and you jump up to pick 5. You're not giving up like 3 first-round picks, right? That's like, here's a first round and then a 4th-round pick on top of that, or a 3rd-round pick on top of that, right? You're not giving up multiple picks because you're not trading up to get that quarterback, right? You're not trading up to pick 1 or 2. This is the 5th overall pick that you're trading up for, right? So you just don't, you're just not going to give up as much. It is interesting however you kind of look at it, right? And also, I want to just go ahead and put this out there. Adam Schefter wrote an article where he said that Missouri offensive tackle Armin Membaugh looks like a top 10 lock, with the Raiders and Jets being possible destinations. This came out in an ESPN article that he put out yesterday. This was specifically a section where he said who could be drafted higher than what most people think. And Armin Membaugh was obviously one of those guys, right? He thinks the following Missouri offensive tackle Membaugh now looks like a top 10 lock, with the Raiders and Jets being possible destinations. I think for the Raiders, DJ Glaze has showed potential and upside, but I really do think for the Raiders, if you want to lock yourself into a guy that's going to be an absolute star in the NFL, Membaugh makes sense, right? This guy's going to be a really, really, really good offensive tackle. And I think it is also fair to say, I think he'll be a really, really, really good player as he gets in the NFL. But he isn't the type of prospect, a guy like Olu Fashanu was last year, right? I think Fashanu was a better prospect. But I still think if you looked at last year's class, Membaugh probably would have been offensive tackle 3 coming out last year, right? Which means if you have pick 6, you can still take that guy, right? But obviously the draft's right around the corner. You have all these reports coming out. You have all these different things that are now kind of being released. But the Raiders team's going to look a lot different. In fact, if you guys are confident in the NFL draft process the same way I am, And I want you guys to join my best ball league that we're going to do prior to the start of the draft. Now, if you've never played best ball before, it's pretty straightforward. You're basically going to get into a 10-man league where each of you guys are going to draft players. And you draft players for the entire year. There's no lineup changes. You basically make those picks. You sit back, you forget about it essentially. But the thing I love about best ball at this point specifically is that we already have the rookies that are available, right? So for example, if you go to the running back position and you pick Ashen Genty, for example, you can get him with the 4th overall pick. That's where he's being ranked right now. Quinshon Judkins, as an example, is ranked at the 71st pick. That means if you draft this guy now, obviously we don't know what team's going to draft him, but if he's a top 5 running back, you're getting yourself an absolute steal. You guys know how I feel about Kyle Williams. He's ranked really, really low at this point. I think he's at like 174.4. You can draft this guy. He's wide receiver 72. That's arguably the final pick that you're going to take. And this guy could be a top 10 pick, top 10 fantasy output wide receiver, right? He can end up finishing in the top 10 with the type of talent he has. You can do this with your quarterback, the running backs, the wide receivers, the tight ends. So to me, best ball is really, really cool at this point because there's that unknown factor of some of these rookies. If you guys are interested in joining my best ball league, drop your emails down in the comments below. I'll send you guys a personalized email either later today or tomorrow at some point. So make sure you guys drop that email down below. Let's get right into it. We have one final update that I want to get into. There was a report by Jeremy Fowler that Alabama quarterback Jaylen Moro is reportedly being eyed by the Las Vegas Raiders. The idea would be to have him as a backup and learn from Geno Smith for a couple of years before taking over the starting role. Now, obviously, this idea of the Raiders drafting a developmental quarterback has kind of been floated around for the last couple of months. It's nothing new, right? Let's just be honest. This part of it is nothing new, and these reports will continue to come out. At the end of the day, the draft is right around the corner, and we'll see what the Raiders actually do. But I want to actually take this report and talk a little bit about the Raiders' future outlook. When you think about what the Kansas City Chiefs got in 2017, 2018 when they drafted Patrick Mahomes, was they got the last 7 years of dominance. They'll have another 7 years of dominance. And the Chiefs will, have won multiple Super Bowls by the time Patrick Mahomes or Andy Reid end up retiring. And the Raiders have to figure that out, right? They have to figure out that quarterback that can, potentially win us a Super Bowl, but have, a 15-year span of being a dominant quarterback. The Raiders have not had that in a really, 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 really long time. Right, we, just historically speaking, haven't had a lot of success at the quarterback position, right? Especially recent history, right? Last 20, 25 years. If the Raiders wanted to bring in Jaylen Moro to develop, that's great. But I don't even care if it's Jaylen Moro, right? But the Raiders do have to figure it out long term. I know for the short term, 2 to 3 years, Geno Smith makes a ton of sense. It allows you to win now potentially. It allows the Raiders to get into a spot where maybe you're able to attract more free agents because you're winning, you're potentially competing for a Super Bowl, but you still have to figure out the long term, right? Geno Smith is 35 years old. You do need to draft the quarterback at some point that has the potential to get you into the Super Bowl, that has the potential to win, right? And win long term. And I think the Raiders are at that point where, at some point in some draft, you have to take a quarterback high. Now, this is not the class to take a quarterback with the 6th overall pick. This is probably a better class to take a quarterback in the 2nd or 3rd round. Obviously, by doing that, you are also going to risk the fact that you might not get that guard or that running back that's, a potential game changer. But you still have to be able to make those risks, right? The Detroit Lions made a pick in the 2nd round just a couple of years ago in Hendon Hooker, who has not played because Jared Goff's done a really, really good job winning, right? We've seen teams like the Steelers take quarterbacks early. Right, not in the top 10, but they took Kenny Pickett fairly high, right? The Steelers, the Lions, these are teams that win, and they're trying to get better by upgrading the quarterback position. The Raiders really have not done that, right? Aiden O'Connell in the 4th round doesn't really count in my opinion, right? Aiden O'Connell, to me, not that taking a quarterback in the 4th round isn't necessarily that, but Aiden O'Connell hasn't really proven at this point that he could be the future for the Raiders. And sure, if Chip Kelly thinks he can develop him, great. Let's do that. But you also want to try to get a quarterback with higher upside, right? And I think a quarterback like Jaylen Moro can make sense if he's there in the 3rd round. Will Howard, if he's there in the 3rd or 4th round, although I think Will Howard probably is closer to closer to Aiden O'Connell in terms of the upside, right? As opposed to a guy like Jaylen Moro who has a ton of upside, right? A quarterback like Josh Allen's another example who had a ton of upside coming in, and he obviously was able to develop that, right? Lamar Jackson was able to develop, right? The Raiders have to figure it out because, Maxx Crosby's not going to be here forever. His contract's designed in a way where he could easily get out of it after 2 years, and Maxx Crosby's been very vocal about that, right? That I'm not going to play forever and I want to win. So hopefully the Raiders go all in, they try to win, and they're able to do it because I want to win. And if the Raiders don't make that happen, then I basically won't be here, right? And I think the Raiders just have to figure out the quarterback position first and foremost long term. Once you have that in place, the other positions will just kind of fall together. Another thing to kind of know is, we've had Maxx Crosby now for like 5-6 years. He's been really, really, really good. But if you don't have a quarterback that can consistently compete and get you into the playoffs, having Maxx Crosby is kind of a waste, right? It really is. Same with like Court Miller. And, I don't want Brock Bowers' career to go by and the Raiders have never figured out the quarterback long term. I don't want Jackson Powers-Johnson's career to go by. We've never figured that quarterback position out. Obviously, I do think there's a good chance we'll be good for the next year or two with Geno Smith. But we still have to think about the long term, right? And I really do hope that as we kind of get into this draft, John Spytek and Pete Carroll do consider that. And again, if it's not this year, maybe it's the year after. But, at some point we got to make that happen, right? And Pete Carroll has already picked a good quarterback in the past in Russell Wilson. So hopefully he's able to do that once again with the next quarterback that they decide to draft, essentially. We'll see what ends up happening, man. Let me know what you guys think. Thumbs up, subscribe if you're not subscribed, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.